Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Metaminute. So, last week we actually recorded an episode. We were talking a bit about the 1.5 updates and stuff, but unfortunately, the recording kind of broke, so we didn't upload that, and thus we are now on episode 8. So with me today we have Dwebble as usual, Temerity from Metahub, Antithesis from Metahub as well, and Professaurus, who also has a YouTube channel, which I'll link in the description down below. He does arena battles, I believe, for the most part, and he's pretty good. He's pretty good, I'd say so. Anyways, now let's get into this week's topic. The biggest topic for this week, or the second biggest, because somehow, at least according to my video views, my strike. The epic strike views are more than the tier list views, which doesn't make too much sense to me, but okay, the second biggest news is the tier list. We kind of released the tier list. And the reaction has been, for the most part, nice, but there are some, disagreements here and there, and that's totally normal. It's a subjective list. I would argue that the lists we had before were a bit more objective, but as the meta evolves, we're getting so many useful swap-in dinos, we have more revenge killers. It's just really hard to create an objective list, but for the most part, we tried the best we could. We had so many people work on this, and just shout out everyone: Dwebble, myself, Brian, Rebecca, Triceratops, HBS, Gentan, Jacqueline, C. Hayes, Professaurus, Antithesis, Temerity, Nathan, and Legman, and Fodder, Poke Fodder, work on this, and I think we did an okay-ish job. So, let's go over this. So, first of all, if you guys don't know already, we added a new tier above Apex, which is Tyrant, and we also, in between Survivor and Alpha, we threw in Omega, although some people don't like that name. We can talk about that in a bit. And then we scrapped Carcass because we don't really feel like there are too many dinos that weren't being in Carcass at the moment. So yeah, there goes Carcass. So anyways, let's start let's talk a bit about the tier list in general and how you guys felt, working on it, and how it really just comes out in the end. So any thoughts on that, Anti?
Well, it was very good fun arguing it, and I think you have an excellent future in politics, Posey. But yeah, no, beyond that, I think that, as you say, it is certainly a controversial list at the end of the day, because there are strong arguments to be made for every individual dinosaur strengths and weaknesses at the moment, and I think that's reflective of a really healthy meta at the moment. And so, yeah, there were disagreements between all of us on at least a couple of the dinosaurs right up until the very end. So I think that some people finding some issues with the list is completely fair, but overall I think it does reflect a pretty accurate view of how the dinosaurs weigh up against each other.
Yeah, that's a really good point, since the more controversial the tier list is, other than us being like flat out just wrong on so many stuff. Like, if we, other than like us putting Purse or Gen 2 in Tyrant, like just what we did with it really does reflect a pretty healthy meta game, it seems like. So, Temerity, how do you think of the tier list so far?
I think it was done fairly well. Obviously, there's always going to be controversial between dinosaurs, but for the most part, what I feel like what some people don't understand is you gotta look at dinosaurs as a whole, what they do for the meta, against the meta, and you gotta rank them properly in the tier list.
Mm-hmm. One point I do want to bring up is I've heard a lot of people say, I like using this dinosaur, and when I use it, I do this or that, and that's totally fine. You don't have to play the metagame. You could totally use dinos that you like. For example, Dwebble used to use Dimetrodon on his team, And, now he got Magna, he replaced Dimension with Magna, but yeah, you could totally use Dinos that you want. I heard one of the commentators say that they like using Lythronax a lot. Although I'm personally not a huge fan of Lythronax or its design, but, if you like Lythronax, then go ahead and use Lythronax. You don't really have to. You don't have to follow the metagame. You don't even necessarily have to follow this tier list. If you disagree with things and you think, some don't really work out for you, and don't use the tier list. And by the way, the tier list is not a team building guide. Don't just, throw in all the tyrant dinos onto your team. Although they are
that is a pretty strong team, to be fair.
That would be a pretty strong team, but, you don't really have to do that.
Add in a Stegod and you're fine, Or a Brachy.
Too. But, anyways, how do you feel about this Dwebble?
Tier list was fun. Team worked great on it. Disagreements are to be expected between ourselves when we were making it and when it comes out. Really, when there's, like everybody's mentioned, when you see those disagreements between the community at large and the team, I guess, of us that made the tier list, it's kind of good because it means people aren't just blindly sticking to the same things, and they're trying different things and having different experiences, which is perfectly fine. If you really disagree with like the list as a whole for whatever reason, honestly, I challenge you, make your own, put it out there, get some feedback. I promise you're gonna get blasted for it. Like, not even trying to be mean, but it's what's gonna happen because it's a whole lot of work for one person. There's 134 dinos now, and it's hard to get all of them right. I'm sure even there's probably mistakes that we made, something we overlooked, little situations. It happens. It's going to happen in every game with every tier list, and that's just part of it. It definitely got a lot more subjective with the meta evolving, which is great, but it makes it really hard for us. But I like the challenge. Keeps it really healthy and interesting.
Totally agree there. So, Prof, how do you think it turned out?
Well, I'm very happy with it. It was a lot of fun working on it, despite all the not despite of, particularly because of all the disagreements. It was a lot of fun arguing back and forth, to be honest. I think the more the game updates, the more we're going to have to try and hammer down some real parameters for what a dino has to be able to do to be in a certain tier, because before now we were able to pretty much look at 1v1 matchups and determine how good a dinosaur was. Swapping abilities and obviously Dracorex Gen 2. It's not really so much about just how a dino stacks up against all the other dinos, but rather how it functions in a team and what excellent team members are to have with it and stuff. So difficult to determine what tier dinos are, I think. Everyone has their own opinion of what a good dino is. Me, for example, I like versatility and able to match up well against as many dinos as possible. But some dinos just don't fall into that camp yet. An argument could be made for them to still be.
Yeah, just to chime in real quick on that, it's not even just the swapping abilities. We've seen a lot of like way better dinos get like hit and run abilities, because when the game first came out, you were looking at just hadrosaurs. So Edmontosaurus and Arano are the big two that come to mind, and Monto had garbage stats and like terrible multipliers, so it wasn't really relevant even when there were less dinos. And then Arano was good, but there was a lot of disagreement on it between people because they didn't like the fact that you would swap out and just take a free hit if you didn't use it properly. So that's also a reason the game's changed, and they also buffed counterattack dinos, which I guess counter almost functions like a swapping ability more so sometimes, but yeah, it's definitely more than just swapping ability.
Like counters didn't even exist when the game first came out. the counter dinos that we see now, like Megalosuchus, what else? Majungasaurus, Rajakylosaurus. At first, they didn't even have counters. They just had really bad stats, and they tried to do vulnerability and pinning, and obviously that didn't work on them. So Ludia had to completely change their kits, and now we have them with counters, and now we have other dinos with quarter counters, half counters, and those really play into a lot of good situations. For example, Trico now with that 0.5 counter. With a couple of this huge base damage, a lot of times I could use it as I would use, a Dioraj or Megalosuchus come in and, they have that counter and KO an opponent. So yeah, it really has changed a lot, I'd say. So do we have any last words on the tier list in general before we go into some specific dinos?
I just want to clarify again real quick for everybody that, pays attention to it. Like, the top 3 tiers in our minds are basically in-game dinos. So just because you see something in Alpha or Apex, just because it's not Tyrant, it's not trash, I promise. There's a lot of good dinos down there. They're just a little more situational than the dinos that tend to be above them. So you can definitely experiment. If your favorite dino is Blue or something, level up Blue. Use her. You can make it work. You just have to work a little harder with it.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that. I mean, there's no reason that any dinosaur within, even potentially even the top 4 teams can make it. Sorry, top 4 tiers can make it in a high level team.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, you're pushing it with any Amiga dinosaur, I think, but
yeah.
Give it a try. You can make it work.
Mm-hmm. I mean, who is it? The Max, who's like pretty high on the leaderboard. He uses a level 30 post-dimension, and it's working out great for him. So yeah, that's fun. So let's get into one of the most heated debates during the tier list discussion, which was Dracorex Gen 2. So Dracorex Gen 2, this interesting dino landed itself in Apex, but during the discussion, it was pretty heated on where it was actually going to land. This one discussion took like about 2 days just for this one dino, just because we couldn't really place it. The biggest arguments were either it was going to be in Apex or it was going to be in Tyrant. There really wasn't no question if it was going to be Alpha or lower. That was kind of, that was out of the question. I don't think anyone argued for that. Any reasonable person wouldn't be arguing for that. So before we get into this, I'm going to, for those of you who don't know, I might be surprised at where Dracorex Gen 2 is placed. I'm just going to, read out its stats and moves. So it's common dino, as 3,000 health, 1,140 damage, 108 speed, 0% armor, and 5% crit chance. And its moves are Strike, Impact and Run, and also has Swap and Shattering Rampage. So that's obviously one of the best swap-in moves in the game, and its stats aren't I wouldn't say they're the worst, but they're pretty bad. And, as most of you I might imagine, it's mostly used for its swap-in move, which I think is really versatile and works in a lot of situations. So, Dwebble, let's talk about Dracorex Gen 2.
Okay, so biggest thing I hear people complain about, not even just when we were talking about it, but on Reddit and other places where I've seen comments about the tier list, people are saying it's not versatile, and okay, I don't understand that argument at all, because literally it can come in at any point once your opponent hits 2.2k health or lower in like a friendly battle, or anytime that double its attack is going to KO something. It can come in and get a kill. You can't cloak unless it's been done, or cloak's not going to work regardless. Well, yeah, if it's done at the turn before, same with evasive. Trying to swap into something that counters it as a prediction is a huge gamble. Like, it's almost unreasonable to expect that because you don't even know if they're going to have it in their hand when the first time you see it. And even in that situation, your dino that's already out has to outspeed their dino. And then it's still a very limited list of things that can even swap into it and still counter it at that point. So it's really versatile in that aspect. It does lean on its team because optimal use, you're going to see it come in and probably KO maybe the first or second dino and then swap back out after it gets bound for one turn. There's only 2 dinosaurs in the game that kill it reliably on turn 1, and that's Postasuchus, which is a good ways down on the list. It has really high turn 1 damage, but after that it's a bit weak, so it's not really going to be on in-game teams. And the other option is Erladom, which is definitely more of a threat, but since it was kind of lackluster in previous updates, it hasn't really caught up to speed yet. Granted, neither has Dracorex Gen 2, but it's a common and a whole lot easier to farm. But yeah, so it's definitely versatile. It doesn't have a whole lot of counters. Other than that, once it's in and bound, you can try to use a pinning strike or something to keep it there so you can kill it before it escapes. But even in that option, you're looking at Dioraja, Gigaspikosaur, and Megalosuchus, I think, are the only relevant dinos in the top 3 tiers, I believe, that can do that. I might be... Actually, no, I think some of the flyers in Alpha tier can do it as well. But it's a short list, so it's definitely versatile. It does a lot of damage. It does rely on its team, however, and it's a one trick, but it's extremely strong when it can do those things.
Mm-hmm. So, Dwebble, if I remember correctly, was arguing for it to be in Tyrant, right?
Yes, I was.
And a Prof, I think, was arguing it for Apex. So why'd you think it would be in Apex then, Prof?
Okay, so it boils down to a couple of things. My version of a tyrant dinosaur is a dinosaur that really isn't that dependent on its team to really lay the hurt on the opponent. If we look at the list of tyrant dinos, they can take out a huge amount of other opposing dinos 1 versus 1. And that being said, Dracorex Gen 2, I can definitely see the argument for it being Tyrant. There's no question about that. But doesn't quite fit my conceived parameters for what I would consider to be a Tyrant tier dinosaur. I just want to say that Apex is still a really, really good tier.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not set, my opinion is definitely not set in stone, but I just personally, for such a dinosaur with such a new and unique strategy, had enough personal experience playing against it yet. Friendly battles have been bugged for a while now, so I've not been unable to test it on a level 26 scenario. And the ones in the arena they've gotten kills on me, but they've also not to lose all that many games. And the meta is still evolving. Pinning dinosaurs, I don't think we can overlook them. Dweb, I think you forgot about Grypolith in your assessment, and not many people have that dino yet.
Right, I did forget that one. Good point.
Is that a lot of pinning dinos they can set up, like with Ferocious Strike, like Megalosuchus, Grypolith, things like that. And these are dinos you do not want to have set up. That's really, really painful if they set up their shields, their attack boosts, and then they can really you get a kill on Dracorex, but then also be really, really scary to face for the next dino that comes in after the kill. And the thing with Dracorex is it's a dinosaur that inevitably will bring in other dinosaurs as well, either teammates or dinos that can on it after it kills something, or and then set up. But to finish off a game, then it's fantastic. But I don't know, it's to fall perfectly into place, I think, to really make Dracorex as good as it can be. optimally, you have it right after a dino with a hit and run ability in your lineup. Doesn't have to be the case, but it obviously really helps. I could definitely see Dracorex Gen 2 being Tyrant with a bit more personal experience, but yeah, to sum up, I just don't have experience yet.
Okay, and that's super fair. One of the, or probably the only really convincing argument that I was presented by was Prof's argument about some dinos who could come in and even if they don't kill Dracorex, they could have a setup like Gripolith or Megalosuchus, or even dinos like Rajakylosaurus. If they get a setup turn, they're pretty scary. So that is a good point that I did consider, but the reason I still think it is Tyrant, and other than the points that Dwebble made, is it does fit well on so many teams. Like in lower arenas, if it fits well with teams with, say, Megalosaurus. It works well with Delta. Works well with Dracoceratops. The Dracoceratops Draco Gen 2 combo is so good. I don't understand why people aren't running it more in lower arenas. I really love that combo. And even in the higher arenas, we could, have a Dracorex Gen 2 with, say, Erlodom or Rajakylosaurus, Spinotasuchus, Tyrannosaurus. These all work with Dracorex Gen 2, Trichosaurus, Dioraja, Alankylos. These are all great dinos that could work really, really well with Dracorex Gen 2. So it could almost fit on any team you run in, all the different tiers of arenas. And it's such a versatile dino, that it could fill so many roles. Like, for example, one role it can do is seal the deal when you're 2-2 or 2-1, and then they have a dino in range of getting killed, and they haven't they could probably swap it out and save it, but if you throw in the Dracorex Gen 2 with the swap and China Rampage and kill it, then they don't have that opportunity. And that's one way to use it. Another way is using it twice, throwing it in at the beginning and then swapping it out and then throwing it back in, so you get twice the use of the swap and China Rampage. And another use is because I think a lot of these games, especially in the top tiers, most of these games are decided by the lead dinos. If you get a bad lead against a better lead, if your lead gets countered, then you're pretty much screwed. And so Dracorex Gen 2 can be swapped in these situations. For example, if you're a higher level Rajakylosaurus against a lower or a lower level Rajakylosaurus, that could be solved by swapping in Draco Gen 2 after a hit, and then what was a disadvantage becomes an advantage for you, and you just totally turn the lead game around in your favor. So that was another point that I thought Dracorex Gen 2 did really well, and why I thought it could have been a Tyrant. So, thoughts on Draco Gen 2?
I mean, I have to strongly disagree with your versatility argument, I've got to say. I mean, I absolutely, unquestionably, Dracorex Gen 2 fills a role better than any other dinosaur in the game. It is the absolute best thing you can have in the back pocket to swap in to get yourself out of a bad situation or to close a match. There's definitely nothing in the game that can come close to its power in that role. But this is why I just cannot see it as a Tyrant, because that is the only thing it does. It does that exceptionally well, and that is and as you say, yes, it can fit into any team at any level of the arena. And it's a common dinosaur. It's certainly accessible, so everyone. I'm not dissuading anyone from pursuing it and using it. I think it has great strength, and it's a really fun dinosaur to use. But when compared against the rest of the Tyrant tier, it just doesn't bring anywhere close to as much to the table, in my opinion. when you think about the really versatile movesets of things like Trico or Rinnex, you think about how many ways that they can impact a match, and then you stack that up against Draco Gen 2, and I just don't see it being a realistic comparison.
Well, yes, but like other Tyrant tier dinos like Spinotasuchus or Tyrannosaurus, they kind of only just do that one thing as well. Tyrannosaurus, all it does is you go in there, Security Strike, and go for a Rampage. And if it doesn't work out, then you're screwed. And then
my vote for Spino was Apex anyway, so I think that's a poor counterexample. But as far as Tenoto goes, I mean, it has great damage, it has superiority strike, and it has distracting as well. So it's got more ability to sway a match out to your favor than Dracorex 2 does in more types of situations.
Well,
I just think that Tyrannosaurus is like the epitome of a versatile dinosaur. Like, it's got the kit to deal with any situation that presents itself to it. Like, if it gets distracted, it can SS. If it's facing another strong dino, like, distract it, then go for the Rampage. I mean, that's what I love to see in a Tyrant dinosaur, like versatility, flexibility.
Okay, so how about Tim? Temerity. we call him Tim when we're not, doing official stuff.
Well, I was one of the people that voted for Tyrant, and the reason I did is I looked at the meta. The meta favors Dracorex Gen 2, point blank. So the role it plays inside the meta is very crucial. People say it's only a one-trick pony, which is true, but its versatility is almost unmatched. Like, it doesn't have the moveset to deal with any situation, but being able to do what it does very well allows it to deal with a lot of dinosaurs. One thing I compared it to, and I played a lot of Pokemon, was Suicide Deoxys. It only has one role. That's basically what Dracorex Gen 2 is. And just because it only has one role does not mean it's not a top tier dino. I mean, Apex is top tier, but it can change the match just as well as any Tyrant. I mean, it can take out two top dinosaurs that you may not even be able to match up well with your team. One of these things that I brought up earlier in the match, in the argument, was the fact that I have found myself not having a dinosaur that has been able to deal with specific dinosaurs. Like, for instance, if they had a Stay God and I had 4 dinosaurs that could not deal with the Stay God, okay, I might do some damage with the Utarynex, come in with the Draco Gen 2 and finish it off. Now I don't have to worry about that Stay God for the rest of the match, which is, in my opinion, huge to get rid of your greatest threat. So I just feel like the way it can sway each match, yeah, it has its weaknesses, but I think it, with basically no counters outside of pinning strike and outside of that, but I mean, it doesn't really have much for bad plays.
It comes at a cost, though. Like, it's not just the pinning strike. It's dinosaurs that can use Dracorex to charge their rampages, like Triostronix, things like Thor. You can outspeed it, set up, and then your next dinosaur has to deal with a really huge hit. It's really, really good at what it does, but if it once it's in, you're going to be hurt by the next thing that comes out.
Well, the Tryannosaurus argument, like it does it 100% it charges for stuff like Tryannosaurus, but like if you're foreseeing them throwing out a charged defense shattering rampage, then you could just keep the Dracorex Gen 2 in. It's an injured dino anyways, and it's it's going to take one of your opponent's biggest hits, or even swap in the if your other dino was injured, the one that you used before swapping in Dracorex Gen 2, you could have that one take the hit as well. You could there are ways around that.
But all the Triostronyx, for example, doesn't necessarily have to go for the rampage on the turn that Dracorex is still in. Like, it could just go for Ferocious Strike, then Armor Piercing Strike. Like, set up a Ready to Crush and then a Ferocious Strike or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just use the Defense Shattering Rampage on the turn that Dracorex, on the turn after Dracorex is killed.
Mm-hmm. You could do that. So, yeah, it for sure. That is a downside to Dracorex Gen 2, and I still think that there are ways around that, but that will be depending on the Triostronyx player, or not Triostronyx, your opponent, and how you do have your team and the situation you're in. So, and that's one other point I want to make about Dracorex Gen 2. It's not a point about it being timed or whatever. It's just how difficult it is to create these tier lists, because just this one dino has so many situations. It's almost impossible. It's not almost. It is impossible to go over all the scenarios, and we obviously would be overlooking a lot of scenarios, and it comes to show you how difficult it is to create one of these tier lists. And I'm not patting myself on the back for creating or participating in creating this tier list, but it's really hard to get everything 100% right. So I like the results so far. It seems good. So any last words on Draco Gen 2 before we move on?
I just want to comment on your idea of the tier list not necessarily being, right or whatever. I don't think its place is to necessarily be 100% right. It's always going to be subjective. It's always going to be, the best opinion that we can collectively come to. And hopefully, the idea behind it is for it to help other people think about the dinosaurs and think about how they, look at their strengths and weaknesses. And this is a good starting point for them to evaluate certain choices, decisions, etc. It's not by any means necessarily the final word.
Mm-hmm.
Going on with that, first, before I talk about the tier list and kind of piggyback on that point, just to get back to Draco Gen 2 real quick, I want to throw out, yes, it's really good right now. Yes, it can be used at all levels, but I do want to throw out a word of caution. It is extremely likely to get changed next patch, I think, if it even survives until 1.6. It's a bit crazy what it does for a common dino, and Ludi has been pretty quick to kind of push common dinos back into their place so far. So I would maybe hesitate if coins are a big issue for you. If coins aren't too much of an issue, go for it. It's fun to use. Try it out. Or at least try it in friendlies first and see if it's worth that risk to you.
Right.
But back to the tier list, it's definitely not 100% right. It's probably never going to be, just because it is a subjective thing. But it's just one of those things. It's a guideline for players. Just scroll through it real quick and tell me that you expect to see something like some of the dinos we're going to talk about a little bit later, like Brachy. Tell me who looked at the 1.5 patch notes and immediately thought, oh man, Brachy's really good now. Because I would be floored if there was more than a handful of people, if any, who realized that just at a glance. But when you see it on the list and you start looking at it and comparing it, you start to see, oh wow, this actually is a big change for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I didn't participate in any of these talks, like, first, looking at the list, I'd be absolutely surprised with Dracorex Gen 2. And, like, even other dinos, Notapad Titan. And, like, sure, these are some controversial dinos, and we will get to those in a bit. But, yeah, it does encourage people to look into these dinos. And if they can come up with better arguments for different placements, that's great. We will look at those, and we would, if we have enough good arguments, we could totally just revise the tier list anytime. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this tier list and keep providing feedback. Although sometimes we might not listen to those feedbacks. Anyways, moving on. So let's talk about, other than Dracogentus, some other controversial dinos. So let's first talk about Gorgosuchus. Every time we do a tier list, people are going to talk about Gorgosuchus because I don't know. I just think people overvalue it, and it does what it does decently well. I wouldn't say it does its job as well as many other people claim it to be. I think it's really fragile. It's super situational. And there are quite a few counters to it, and that's why I don't think a lot of those arguments for Gorgosuchus are that great. Anyone else has any thoughts on Gorgosuchus? By the way, Gorgosuchus is in Omega.
No, I completely agree with it where it's placed. There's dinosaurs that benefit better from a setup like Gorgo, and that's really where Gorgo doesn't do well, is because it does require a setup. Where most of the dinos like Thor or Theorak, they don't need that setup in order to do good, where Gorgo does. So I think that combined with it, I mean, it's not super slow, but there's plenty of dinosaurs that are faster than it. And only a 20% crit, I don't feel it deserves anything higher than Omega.
Although I personally don't feel like it having a setup turn has too much to do with its placement. Although it certainly is a factor. But yeah, I remember when doing the tier list, when talking about Gorgosuchus, the opinion was almost unanimous on its placement. So yeah, I just want to throw that out there. Anyone else? Any thoughts on Gorgosuchus?
Yeah. Gorgosuchus is an interesting dino. I think it's really, really good up to a certain point in the arena. People really kind of like fall in love with how well it's doing for their team. Like, it can cleansing impact raptors, it can defense shatter tanks. It seems really versatile and stuff. But then surely like power creep settles in, and other dinos just get that bit faster. Gorgosuchus ends up being a poor man's Triostronix. Like, they have a really similar role, except Triostronix's increased bulk and immunity is just factor to keep using Gorgosuchus, in my opinion. But it is a wrecking ball when it sets up, but you really have to rely on your opponent not having many dinosaurs that are faster than it. It's like, its speed is okay, it's good, but there are so many dinosaurs in the 126, 124 even and above speed range that just deal with it so well. So I think it's got an amazing moveset. It's got a nice crit chance. It's got a big attack stat. These are all really nice things, but I think in the end, the metagame isn't too kind to Gorgosuchus itself, which causes it to fall off a bit, in my opinion.
Yeah, and like Gorgosuchus at Omega doesn't mean it's a bad dino by any means. Like, it functions very similarly to Rex, except Rex doesn't need a setup and Gorgosuchus needs a setup. But with a setup, Gorgosuchus could potentially kill a bit more. Well, I wouldn't say kill more dinos, but it does. Like, Rex can very reliably 1v1 like any of these dinos under Omega. And Gorgosuchus kind of does that, except it could also come in and outspeed a almost dead dino. So, um, yeah, that's why I think Gorgosuchus is in Omega. Like there are a lot of strong dinos in Omega, like I just mentioned, Rex. You got Rex here, Spinotasuchus Gen 2, Alanka, Delta, Lycosaurus, Diplotator, Worosaurus. This isn't a bad tier, and I just think it's quite fitting. Any other thoughts on Gorgosuchus?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in real quick. Like just at a glance, it's a tank buster through and through is its primary job, it seems like. But then you compare it to like one of the big meta tanks like Stegod or something, and it actually doesn't have the damage to punch through them because they're gonna smack it turn 1, slow it turn 2, and kill it turn 3. And there's nothing it can do about that. It hurts them. It sets up maybe if you have another dino on the bench that can come up and set up off of that injured tank, but that's kind of not its own merit anymore. Just that, the same way that it kind of it wants that setup turn itself. You can't be discredited because it is a team game for each battle, but it's not a strong argument for it. I don't feel like.
Mm-hmm. So, that's for Gorgosuchus. So, let's move on to some other controversial dinos. Some people think we place Rajakylosaurus a bit low. I don't really get this argument at all. I think Alpha is pretty fitting for Rajakylo. The meta absolutely just destroys it. Almost everything at its level in this meta just completely outright beats it. There are a few exceptions, but it really just does not fit well in this meta at all. And it did get armor piercing counter, but almost all the other dinos who got this move, I think benefits more from the the counter buff than Rajakylosaurus. Rajakylosaurus is extremely slow. Its moveset is it's so easy to counter its moveset. A null dino just completely just breaks its moveset. And yeah, it just gets countered by everything. So any thoughts on Rajakylosaurus?
Yeah, I completely agree with Rajakylo's place in the tier. Like, I think people who are complaining about it being too low, people who leveled theirs pretty high and had a really good time with it, but with big chompers outspeeding it and absolutely crushing it, the increased value in dinosaurs that deal damage over time, the fact that it's outsped by tanks and you can just like shields in front of it as well if you're that desperate. Like, it was faster than Trico last patch, but now even Trico outspeeds it. It's absolutely horrible for Rajakylo. Like, I completely agree with that tier placement.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to chime in on Rajakylo?
I mean, let's not forget about stuns either. I mean, with the increased percentage in stuns overall, it gets beat by everything, like what Pokey said.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I think you guys
want
are overstating it a bit. I mean, it is still an alpha tier dinosaur. It can still bring some value to a team. It is, it's still it's still got a relatively strong counterattack in the arm piercing counterattack. But it's, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with its placement whatsoever. But you guys are talking like it's, down in Survivor.
Oh no, it does really well against these alpha dinos. And
Yeah, keep in
the
mind
Omega
these
dinos.
comparisons are like against Apex Alpha Tyrant dinos, not the things below it. That's what we're looking at. That's why it's sounding kind of bad right now. But to be fair, it still matches up pretty well against most of the tanks. And Kintro is the big exception since it also functions as a null. But it does okay against all the tanks still, even with the shield. The problems though is that's a pretty big laundry list. It struggles with big chompers, bleed, distract, and stun. And there's a whole lot of that in the tiers above it.
Mm-hmm. No. So yeah, poor Rajakylo.
Yep.
If you have it
But
already,
it doesn't care about
Mhm.
slow effects. It's got that going for it.
Yeah. Very high bar there. So yeah, if you already have Rajakylo and you have it on your team, you don't have anything really better to replace it with. It's still a great dino to use. It has some really good situational uses, but if you haven't created it yet, I would strongly suggest your Anki DNA be devoted to the slow and hard process of creating Tricosaurus, which is I think it's really hard to argue that it's not the best or one of the best dinos in the game at the moment. All right, so moving on, some other dinos. Brachy, this is your favorite double. Do you want to talk a bit about Brachy?
Oh, I'd love to talk about Brachy. So, okay, I'm a huge proponent of Brachy right now. I'm searching for them. I want to level it up and use it in my team. Don't quite have enough DNA to get it up there yet, but I did not see this coming whatsoever. It's not that I loved Brachy before. It's just that its kit and the way it kind of matches up into the meta is really, really interesting right now. Because what happened before was it was, solidly below Stegodeus because armor piercing rampage versus just regular rampage. It had a lower crit chance. Stats were okay compared to its moveset was a bit worse. But actually looking at it now, Stegodeus went down to rampage, which Brachy matches. Brachy has nearly the same effective HP. It loses out a little bit because of armor, but actually has more raw HP, which I don't value armor too terribly high. There's a lot of big chompers, a lot of armor piercing counters. There's just a lot of ways to get around that, so it's not a huge deal. Bellow having priority helps in like the Utah Renex matchup because you get to have the damage from the distracting rampage beforehand and still force it to instant charge to maintain speed priority. So that's really useful. And then, of course, a 30% crit. If you get that on a rampage, that's 3k damage that's coming at you. That hurts. And it can do that, every other turn. And it's got the bulk to stick around. And the other, probably the biggest advantage it has is it outspeeds the big chompers. So, yeah, it might still lose, but it's going to get a hit in and potentially set something else up to come in and clean them up without having to deal with the full health, dino staring you down with that had a setup turn or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just looking at the tanks in general in the meta, Brachy definitely is one of the better tanks in the game. The the big bulky tanks, which are Brachy, Gigaspike, Dotapad, Titan, and Stegodeus. All four of these are quite usable at the moment, I would say. The more armor heavy tanks like Trigodistus, which has a bit less health, I would say still holds their unique position in comparison to these, bulky tanks. But yeah, as much as I dislike Notepad Titan, I don't. Its design, I wouldn't say I dislike it, but it doesn't like strike me as a outstanding one. But yeah, they all function really well in the meta at the moment, despite the meta being a bit against them, but they still do well in a lot of matchups. So, any other thoughts on Brachy?
I mean, yeah, I'm one who hadn't even considered Brachy yet until Dweb pointed. Was it Dwebble or Posey? One of you two pointed them out to me, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, these matchups are, really on par with Stegods. If resources were infinite, I would absolutely switch out Stegod for Brachy. Just have fun with it, use something a bit different for a while.
Mm-hmm. It was Dweb. I'm not taking that credit there.
All right.
Little blames.
One other thing I want to chime in. Yes, the meta kind of it's kind of a split. There's two sides of that story. The meta is a bit against it with the big chompers. There's a lot of strong ones running around right now, which certainly hurt them. But there's also a lot of swapping, And tanks are invaluable when it comes to swapping because
Yes.
sometimes you get into sticky situations where you're forced into a just regular swap and not a hit and run because maybe you got slowed or whatever. And the tanks are one of the kind of unique in the fact that they can actually come in, soak up a hit, and not just die immediately afterwards. So you can't fill the team full of squishy dinos and ever expect to really get good swaps consistently.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a few thoughts on Brachy. And before we go, let's talk about one last dino. It's a tyrant dino. It is a Spinotasuchus. So there was a bit of a debate. I don't think it was nothing to the extent of the Draco Gen 2 debate, but Spinotasuchus, there was a little debate about it being a tyrant or apex. I personally, I could see it in both, or in either, low tyrant or high apex. So yeah, what I think Spinotasuchus does, and I do uh, slightly lean towards it being low tyrant. Um, what I see it does, it does bleed and lethal wound for 3 turns. That's a guaranteed knockout on a dino if it doesn't swap out or doesn't cleanse or have immunity. So I think that's a pretty strong case for it. Like Indoraptor, why Indoraptor is so good is it has a decent chance of taking out almost every dino in the game, and that's why we have Indoraptor up there. And well, not the sole reason, but that's a big component for me at least. So yeah, Spinotasuchus does have that ability. It is 129 speed, so it's one of the faster bleeders, and it has more health than Dimordactylus, or which one was the 129 one? Was it Darwinopterus?
Yes, it was
So
Darwin.
yeah, Darwin also has 129 speed, but it's a bit slower, or not a bit slower. It has a bit less health, and yeah, its kit I would say is a bit better than Spinotasuchus, but the low health really hurts it. Because if you want to bleed, you want to stick in there until they completely bleed out. And one thing I think a lot of people overlook is its 20% crit with a critical impact. It has an above average base damage stat and a crit impact on that. And if it does crit, which it does have a really good chance of critting, it does a lot of damage. With 129 speed, with a crit impact, that's a lot of damage. And it also has swoop, which is another bleeding ability that also works really, really well with this meta. If you're, swooping into, a counter dino or some dino with a swap in ability, if you're swooping into a Trico, into Dracorex Gen 2, that's really amazing. It gets you out of really sticky situations. It can save you a dino, and as I've established before, it does really well 1v1. It can take out a lot of dinos 1v1, and if you take it out or swoop it out, it could come back and lethal wound another dino. So that's a pretty powerful move set in my opinion. Anyone else want to talk about Spinotasuchus?
Yeah, no, well, go ahead. Well, another thing that helps it is with superiority strike no longer cleansing it. There's not really you force swap outs and you force dinosaurs that you don't want to see right now until you're like set up for it, and it bleed just it really has no counter besides swapping out. And with that speed, also, it makes it a very primary late game sweeper too.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to talk about Spinotasuchus?
It's my favorite dinosaur to use, as
Obviously.
you might see from the profile picture.
Uh-huh.
But I think it definitely deserves to be Tyrant. The thing is, it has very, very few poor matchups. Impact deals with things that don't have armor generally, whereas Bleed deals with things that have high HP and high armor, since it just bypasses both of those.
Mm-hmm.
Temerity, it does have counters in immune dinos. Earlodom and Indom are really, really bad matchups for Spino. They're not too common, but they do happen, and dinos that you necessarily want to be forced to switch out of, since Earlodom, despite sharing the same base speed, will always be faster due to being a higher rarity. It's a free cloak and then rampage off on Spino, which really, really sucks. And Indom, you don't see it too often on the very high end of the ladder, but definitely in Ruins and I think low aviary, Indom is still extremely prevalent. And unless you have something like Ankylosaurus, it's not cool to have to swap into a cloaked Indom rampage. So there are countermeasures, but those are the only two that really, really stand out to me. The other ones, I really like dinosaurs that can give themselves a good matchup against a large variety. And as Postmon said, it's like Indoraptor in that regard. But another really cool thing is that Indoraptor is when you reach, like, I don't know what are the rankings are, about 4,500, 4,000 plus. Indoraptor is going to be on nearly every team, and Spinotasuchus is one of the dinos that deals really Raptor really well. So you've got to check to a dino that is going to be on 99% of people's teams at a certain trophy range, since Lethal Wound to hit the Indoraptor after a cleansing impact, and it goes obviously through dodge. Critical impact does huge damage due to Indoraptors not having armor. Dinos that can do well against Indoraptor, which is a dino that can do well against nearly every dino, are rated pretty highly in my book.
And Anti?
I mean, Spinotasuchus has an awful lot going for it, and is definitely the strongest bleeder in a meta that's, really ramped up the power of bleeders. However, again, I think it's sort of falling on sort of a similar argument to my Dracorex G2 argument. I just think that there is, I mean, I argue this is less of a problem with Spinotasuchus than with Dracorex Gen 2, but I think that it does lack versatility in its moveset. It is also quite frail, and I mean, when you're comparing it to it does have two roles really. It's got the obviously the bleed mechanic, and it's the ability to run as a high-speed sweeper. And the bleed mechanic, it is absolutely excellent. In terms of being a high-speed sweeper, most other things that you could use at that kind of level are going to perform that role better. And that's not to say that is showing that Spinota is weak in that role or anything like that. It's just that it is very vulnerable to things that it cannot one-shot, or things that will not die to its bleed.
Yeah, I also don't really use Spino as a sweeper. It's one of my absolute favorite leads in the game. Generally, I have a hard time deciding leads, but when I have Spino, I know that I can just use it early game to break a team's core wide open with bleed and critical impact. So I tend to use it early game rather than late game, personally at least.
Right, I see that's where the difference between a level 28 Spino and a level 24 Spino comes out. Because I put my Spino out and it gets out-leveled by the Rinnex it's facing. You put your Spino out and it out-levels it. So,
Fair point.
the Rinnex just rampage and, so distracting rampage impacts and runs.
I think it does lose to equal level Renix. Lose, but the Renix is it's going to be on its last.
If you get the crit, then it's well worthwhile to have that trade to lose the Spino to do that much damage to the Rinnex, but or even lethal.
Last point I wanted to throw in about Spino is that it's the dino that can cause you to, instead of lose trophies, at least maintain the same amount of trophies by forcing a draw. That is a really, really useful aspect of it.
That is actually a very good point. I do not object to Spino being in Tyrant. It was just my vote would have gone to Apex because it does have. To my mind, at least, considerably more weakness than the rest of the tier.
Yeah, I could totally see that as well. And as a prof said, the really big immunity counters are probably just Earldom and Indom. Some people throw out so strong. Go ahead.
I said I feel you guys are forgetting Monomi in the immune counters.
Yeah, like a lot of people throw out Tryannosaurus against my Spinotasuchus, and like, come on, I have a 60% chance of winning that matchup, and you have a 40% chance of winning that matchup. Why would you do that? So, any other thoughts on Spinotasuchus?
I just wanted to kind of bullet point tidy it up. I do want to say I agree. It's probably the weakest tyrant on the list.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a very debatable topic. I think all of us would probably agree to that. But I do think it edges out on the tyrant side, mostly because, just run through bullet points for its strengths. High speed, 129 is pretty much king in this meta. It suffers in that regard slightly due to its rarity, but it's fine for the most part. It's generally going to outspeed most of its competition. Bleed and crit, the combo of the two between its damage and its the bleed means it has pretty strong head-to-head matchups with a good variety of dinos. It might not win, but it's going to take something down with it, which can really bail you out of a bad situation, like we kind of mentioned earlier with Draco Gen 2. If they have one dino that counters everything in your hand, if you can take it out with a bleed and trade 1-for-1 with that dino, you've turned that unwinnable game into a chance at least. You're back up to 3-3 instead of, that one dino versus the world, and you can't stop it. And then the biggest thing that made me teeter to the side of Tyrant is what Professor said about it might not win you a game, but if it leads and it limps out with a couple hundred HP, that speed tier it comes in with lethal wound, and it can save a game by forcing that draw, even if it's going to die. And it's happened to me numerous times. It's quite annoying to deal with.
Those people.
But, it's a good strategy. I can't complain about that. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I must admit I wasn't particularly evaluating that point, even though I used that myself and have it used against me plenty of times. I wasn't actually considering that aspect when I was weighing its relative strengths. And yeah, I mean, that is something that it does have over the other tyrants, to be quite honest.
Oh, and one other quick thing that I kind of missed. I value swapping abilities very highly. So swoop, especially because DOT strong, it doesn't do damage, so it doesn't get counterattacked on the way out. And then it lets you get a new dino in without just straight losing a turn. That's very valuable to me. It lets you play around it a little bit more flexibly, which is super important.
Oh, one argument I would have against Swoop is Swoop doesn't deal damage on impact. Unlike impact and run, rampage and run, it deals damage after the turn it deals damage at the end of the turn. So the dino coming in is probably going to take a hit. So that's one thing I would say against Swoop. Otherwise, Swoop is a really strong swap out ability. So I'm actually enjoying this discussion. So let's throw in a few more dinos. We could go over those real quick before we wrap this up. So Tyrannolophosaur. So we put Tyrannolophosaur, I believe, in Alpha, and Tyrannosaurus is in Tyrant. And some people were confused about that. Like, why is Tyrannolophosaur in Alpha and Tyrannosaurus in Apex? Well, first of all, I'd like to say a few things about this. Tyrannosaurus is, in my view, a direct upgrade from Tyrannolophosaurus. It has just almost across the board better stats. The speed, I think, is really important. It helps it in a lot of matchups. Just that the speed upgrade there, and also you could argue that nullifying is as good or as useful as Superiority Strike, but my other point is that nullify isn't really that relevant in a lot of matchups. Like a lot of people use it to nullify the dodge and cloak, and the only one that really is that relevant is against Indominus Rex. Otherwise, if you're using it against Indoraptor, Erlodon, and Monomi, you're not going to win either way. So that's my problem with Tyrannolophosaur there. And another thing is it has distracting strike instead of distracting impact, and I value multipliers a lot, and that one kind of hurts Tyrannolophosaur in its placement. So anyone else want to chime in on Tyrannolophosaur?
I think it could be Apex based on its design. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
I'll agree with that point.
Yep.
Except it should have had a frill.
Style points.
Yeah, if it had a frill, I would have voted Apex.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I do think an argument could be made for low Apex. Like, it's a standalone. It's a very good dinosaur, but it faces a lot of competition. You're not going to level it past 20 in any circumstance. It's got a direct upgrade. Like, in a vacuum, I think as a chance at being low Apex, I can see the argument. Like, Null is really nice to have against Indominus, especially since Indominus got a buff in this meta. Might be seeing a bit more of it. But yeah, the distracting strike, honestly, I feel it's close to a blank move slot. Like, I'm never going to use it.
Yeah, I could totally see it in low Apex as well. Like, one other thing, Nullifying Strike does work really well against the things that are slower against it. Like, for example, Rajakylo. Null absolutely destroys it, but then it isn't that useful because in most case scenarios you're going to use your defense shattering moves against Rajakylo anyways, and the other tanks that are under it that also have buffs. So I would say Null isn't that great, but it is still useful, and that's why it's in Apex. It's for sure one of the better, not Apex, it's in Alpha, and it's for sure one of the better Alpha dinos. It could be in low Apex, but yeah, for the reasons I stated before, that's why it's in Alpha. It's still a great dino. Any more thoughts on Tyrannosaurus?
Again, I just wanted to try to sum it up a little bit. It seems like it's more of an upgrade to T-Rex rather than a downgrade to Tenontorex in my mind when we were looking at it tier-wise. So Tenontorex, yes, it's hybrid, so yes, it is an upgrade. But the big difference there is, okay, the stat jump is big enough, I think, to justify a tier between them by itself. But Tenontorex, where it picks up superiority strike, also gets the flexibility in more matchups. It can suddenly has an answer to distract dinos, or raptors particularly, since most of the higher level distractors have some way to circumvent it a little bit. But raptors particularly, and then the distracting impact does enough damage to other tyrannosaurs without really sacrificing. It does enough damage on its own, and you still get that distract effect, so it survives as well. And then that's the big thing with it. Tyrannolophosaur is going to come in. It's probably going to trade 1-for-1 with a lot of dinos around it, and a few above it, even, and almost everything below it, just like T-Rex does. So it can be used in that way, and it's a little bit better because of that speed. But the flexibility is what hurts it, in my mind.
Yeah, I don't even think it's comparable to Tenontorex. One of the reasons why Tenontorex is such a great dinosaur is that superiority strike defense shattering rampage combo. No other dino in the game does that, and you could maybe make an argument for Trico kind of does that, but the damage, as much damage Trico does, Tenontorex does that better than an ID plus a DSR there. So yeah, Tyrannosaurus doesn't do that at all, and Tenontorex does that, and that's why Tenontorex is in Tyrant, and it's down in Alpha. So last dino before we go, and I promise this is the last one, Thorodolsaur. So Thorodolsaur came in pretty hype. It seemed like a direct upgrade to Alcino. It had more speed. It had that 40% crit from Tarbosaurus, which is absolutely crazy. I think it's among one of the best dinos in the game, but it might just be short of becoming a Tyrant. And one of the reasons I would argue that is it, unlike the other Tyrants, it's hard for it to perform well after a kill. It lost its armor, which kind of sucks for it. To be honest, I thought the armor was a really good improvement for Alisano, not improvement, but a really good thing that Alisano had. The armor helped it a lot, and Tyrannosaurus doesn't really have that, and it's not. It might not be that big of a deal, but it really changes how your opponents play around it. So I could totally see it in low tyrant, but I'm slightly leaning towards high apex there. Anyone else wants to chime in on that? Mr. Thor Dinosaur profile pick.
Certainly, yeah. I was waiting to see if anyone else wanted to jump in first. We wish to polite. Anyway, I think that Tyrannosaurus is placed. It's one of those contentious ones. It is still definitely a direct upgrade over Allosaurus, but Allosaurus in itself is a great dinosaur, and it's only that little bit better. And situationally, Allosaurus can outperform Tyrannosaurus, as you were alluding to in the loss of the armor, and there's actually a bit of a HP loss as well between the two. Thorodolosaur is a significantly weaker dinosaur in terms of taking a hit, but it's obviously putting out harder hits. It's while I'd say that if we're looking at the where we're comparing them to in Tyrants, I'd say that with Allosaurus you're comparing it to Tricosaurus, where it performs strictly worse as the kind of damage off sync / massive damage in response when you get the opportunity to lay it out. And then Tyrannosaurus against Tyrannosaurus, which obviously we were just discussing how strong Tyrannosaurus is with the incredibly versatile moveset, which as good as instant charges on Tyrannosaurus, it just doesn't compare with the utility that Tyrannosaurus brings as a high damage armor piercer. So yeah, there is definitely a gap between the two. Tyrannosaurus is an upgrade over Allosaurus, although slight role change, so it's hard to directly compare the two. But yeah, strong apex rather than tyrant.
Anyone else?
Well, I currently use it on my team, but I'm planning to replace it with Tyrannosaurus. I think it's a very glamour dino. Like that 40% crit really, really lures you into wanting to run it on your team. But I've really come to notice that I thought that 40% crit was more than it was. It has not been critting. There have been times where I really, really needed a crit, had a high chance for it, but still didn't get it. And that cost me a game. Well, multiple games. It's still under 50% chance. Thing I don't like about Thorodolosaur is that it is absolutely obliterated by distracting moves. Really suffers from that. Like a bunch of other Tyrant tier dinos have distracting moves that just body it. Like Tyrannosaurus walks away with barely any HP loss from a Thor face down. Like Trico, it has an interesting matchup against Trico. Either can win depending on the moves chosen. Also can just distract it, and then set up its combo. Like it still loses a fair amount of HP, especially if Thor crits, but it still walks away from that matchup as a winner. Yeah, it's just a glass cannon, and glass cannons in the long run just aren't reliable enough for me to have on my team.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there. It isn't as consistent as most of the other Apex, or not Apex, Tyrant dinos. So yeah, it is a problem there. Anyone else want to talk about Thor?
I just wanted to throw in the quick number. When you're using it over 2 turns with that 40% crit, you're more than likely going to land a crit on one of your 2 attacks. It's a 64% chance to land a crit on one. But if you're only landing on the instant charge, it's not that big of a deal, especially if they have armor. So that kind of hurts it a little bit. And it's certainly a strong dino. It was definitely discussed as being Tyrant class. But ultimately, to me, the consistency and, more importantly, the lack of flexibility in its kit is what keeps it in Apex versus Tyrant.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm just looking through people's team, and Lego Man has a level 27 Thorodolosaur with a level 30 Uranix. That's pretty crazy. Mark the Shark doesn't have it, so sorry, sorry guys, that's an inside joke I just had to bring up. So, okay, let's let's finish this. Okay, so that's the tier list we came up. It was posted earlier this week, and I hope you guys found it helpful. And so yeah, that's it for this week's Metaminute. I'm sorry it went on a bit longer. It's like let me check. We're over an hour. Tell us if you think if an hour is a bit too long, or should we still stick to the 40 minutes. But anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. Remember to check out Professaurus's YouTube channel. It's pretty nice. He has arena battles at really high levels, which I find quite amusing. A lot of people have been talking about it. It's I enjoyed it a lot. And also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I don't know why you're watching the Metaminute in the first place if you're not subscribed. But if you haven't, please consider doing so. And we'll see you guys next week for Metaminute.